Ryan had been living with his best friend's sister, Nina, for exactly 3 months and 2 weeks. The arrangement started out of pure convenience. Nina needed a place after her previous roommate moved across the country, and Ryan had an extra bedroom he couldn't afford to keep empty. Her brother Jake vouched for both of them, saying they'd get along great since they'd known each other for years through family gatherings and group hangouts. Those first few weeks were easy and comfortable. They split groceries down the middle, took turns cooking, and stayed out of each other's way when needed. Ryan worked early mornings at a construction company, while Nina taught elementary school kids and came home exhausted most afternoons. Their schedules rarely overlapped except on weekends, which suited them both fine. That particular Saturday started like any other weekend morning should have. They'd made plans 3 days earlier to drive up to the state park for a hiking trail Nina had been talking about for weeks. Ryan set 2 alarms on his phone, knowing he had trouble waking up on weekends after brutal work weeks. The first alarm went off at 7 in the morning. He slapped it silent without opening his eyes. The second alarm buzzed 30 minutes later. Again, his hand found the phone and shut it off, while his brain stayed deep in sleep. Nina had been awake since 6, packed and ready to go, sitting at the kitchen table drinking her second cup of coffee. By 8 o'clock, she started getting annoyed. By 8:30, she was standing outside Ryan's bedroom door, knocking loudly and calling his name. Nothing worked. She could hear him snoring through the door, completely dead to the world. She tried calling his phone. The ringtone blared from inside his room, but he didn't budge. She knocked harder, practically pounding on the door. Still nothing. Nina felt her frustration rising, but something else mixed in too, a kind of playful determination. She wasn't going to let him sleep through their plans, not after she'd been looking forward to this hike all week. Without thinking too hard about it, she opened his bedroom door and walked right in. The curtains were drawn, leaving the room dim and cool. Ryan was sprawled across his bed on his back, one arm thrown over his face, completely tangled in his sheets. Nina stood there for a second, hands on her hips, trying to figure out the best way to wake this impossible man. Then the idea hit her. It was bold, maybe even a little crazy, but she was tired of being polite. She walked over to the bed, climbed up carefully, and sat right down on his chest. Not hard enough to hurt him, just enough weight to definitely get his attention. She placed her hands on his shoulders and shook them gently. Ryan's eyes flew open in confusion. For a few seconds, his brain couldn't process what was happening. The first thing he saw was Nina's face hovering above his, framed by her long, dark hair that fell around them like a curtain. The morning light coming through the crack in the curtains hit her from behind, making her look almost unreal. Her eyes were bright with laughter and triumph, her lips curved in this victorious smile. But Ryan wasn't laughing. Something happened in that moment that he couldn't explain. His breath caught in his throat. He became suddenly, intensely aware of everything. The warmth of her body sitting on his chest, the faint smell of her coffee and vanilla shampoo, the way her hair tickled his arms, how close her face was to his, the feeling of her hands on his shoulders. Nina's smile started to fade as she noticed the change in his expression. The laughter died in her throat. Ryan was looking at her in a way he'd never looked at her before. His eyes had gone dark and focused, locked on her face with an intensity that made her heart start racing. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Nina suddenly realized the position they were in, how intimate it looked, how it felt. Her hands were still on his shoulders. She could feel his heartbeat under her, strong and fast. Something deep inside her stirred, something she'd never felt around Ryan before. It was like her body recognized something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She should have jumped off, should have laughed it off and made a joke. Instead, she stayed frozen, staring down at him, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. Ryan's hands had come up instinctively when she'd sat on him, hovering near her waist but not quite touching. Now they hung there in the space between them, uncertain. Finally, Nina forced herself to move. She scrambled off him quickly, almost falling in her hurry to get away. Her face felt hot, her hands shaky. She backed toward the door, trying to find her voice. "We're late," she managed to say, and her voice came out strange and breathless. "Get dressed. I'll wait in the car." She practically ran out of his room, closing the door behind her with shaking hands. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and pressed her palms to her flushed cheeks. What just happened? That was Ryan, her roommate, her brother's best friend, the guy she'd known for years without feeling anything more than friendship. But something had shifted in those few seconds. Something had woken up inside her that she didn't know existed. And from the look in Ryan's eyes, she wasn't the only one who felt it. The drive to the state park was torture. Nina kept her eyes fixed on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Ryan sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, neither of them speaking except for his occasional mumbled directions from the GPS. The easy comfort they'd always shared had vanished, replaced by this strange awareness that made the car feel too small. They made it through the hike by focusing on the trail, the views, anything but each other. But even then, Ryan found himself noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way Nina pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how she laughed at the squirrels fighting over an acorn, the curve of her neck when she tilted her head back to look at the tall trees. When they got home that evening, Nina headed straight to her room, claiming she needed to shower and prep for the school week. Ryan stood in the kitchen alone, running his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. This was Nina. He'd seen her at barbecues, Christmas parties, birthday dinners for years. She'd always just been Jake's little sister, pleasant and friendly but nothing more. Now, suddenly, he couldn't stop thinking about how she'd looked sitting on top of him that morning. The feeling wouldn't leave him alone. The next few days were awkward in ways that made both of them miserable. Ryan started coming home later, claiming overtime at work. Nina began staying after school for extra hours, helping other teachers with their classrooms. They were avoiding each other, and they both knew it. But by the end of that first week, something strange started happening. The avoiding turned into something else. Something neither of them intended, but couldn't seem to stop. It started small. Nina came home one evening to find Ryan cooking dinner. He'd made enough for two without asking if she wanted any. She sat at the kitchen counter, watching him move around their small kitchen, and they fell into conversation about their days. Easy talk, surface level, but it felt good, normal. Except Nina couldn't stop watching his hands as he chopped vegetables. Strong hands, careful and precise. She'd never noticed his hands before. Ryan served her a plate, and their fingers brushed when she took it. Both of them froze for just a second before pulling away. But Nina sat at the counter to eat instead of taking her food to her room like she'd planned. Ryan leaned against the opposite counter, and they kept talking. About work, about the weather, about nothing important. But underneath it all ran this current of something unspoken. The next night, Nina cooked. Again, enough for two. Again, they ate together in the kitchen. This became their new routine, cooking for each other, eating together, talking about safe topics while carefully not mentioning that morning or the weird tension between them. Then the touching started. Accidental at first. Nina would reach for a glass from the cabinet at the same time Ryan did. Their arms would brush. Both would pull back quickly, apologizing. But it kept happening. Too often to be truly accidental. Ryan would walk past Nina in the narrow hallway, and his hand would land briefly on her lower back as he moved around her. Nina would touch his shoulder when she wanted his attention, letting her hand linger just a moment longer than necessary. The movie nights were the worst and the best. They'd always watch TV in the living room on different ends of the couch. Now, somehow, the space between them kept shrinking. First, Nina sat in the middle instead of the far end. Then Ryan did the same. Soon they were sitting close enough that their legs touched. Neither moved away. One night, about 2 weeks after the incident, they were watching some action movie neither of them cared about. Nina had curled her legs under her, leaning slightly against Ryan's side. His arm was stretched across the back of the couch. not quite touching her shoulders but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. A scary scene came on, and Nina jumped, instinctively grabbing Ryan's other arm. She felt his muscles tense under her fingers. When she looked up at him to apologize, his face was so close to hers. Those same intense eyes from that morning were looking at her again. Her hand was still on his arm. His arm on the couch had lowered, now resting across her shoulders. They stayed like that for the rest of the movie, neither watching the screen, both hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched. When the credits rolled, Nina forced herself to stand up and say goodnight, even though every part of her wanted to stay exactly where she was. That's when the jealousy started. Nina couldn't help herself. When Ryan's phone rang and a female voice came through, asking if he wanted to grab drinks, Nina felt something ugly twist in her stomach. She listened from the kitchen as Ryan made an excuse and declined. She shouldn't have felt relieved, but she did. Ryan experienced the same thing when one of Nina's teacher friends stopped by to invite her to a dinner party, mentioning that several single guys from their school district would be there. Ryan found reasons to stay in the living room, making his presence known, until Nina politely said she was too busy to attend. They were circling each other like this, getting closer and closer, building something neither knew how to name. Nina stopped accepting invitations to go out with friends. Ryan turned down after work gatherings he used to enjoy. They wanted to be home with each other, even if they couldn't admit why. Jake called Ryan one evening while they were cooking together. Nina could hear her brother's voice through the phone, asking Ryan what was new, how the roommate situation was working out. Ryan's eyes found Nina across the kitchen as he answered. "It's good," Ryan said, watching Nina stir sauce on the stove. "Really good. No problems at all." Nina felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, because they both knew that wasn't entirely true. There was a problem. A big one. They were falling for each other and had no idea what to do about it. 3 weeks after that morning, Jake decided to visit for the weekend. He called Nina on Thursday to tell her he'd be driving in Friday night and staying until Sunday. Nina felt panic rise in her chest. She and Ryan had created this little bubble where they could pretend nothing had changed while everything actually had. Jake's visit would pop that bubble completely. That evening, she told Ryan about Jake's plans. He went pale, setting down the onion he'd been chopping. They stood in the kitchen, staring at each other, both thinking the same thing. Jake knew them too well. He'd see through whatever act they tried to put on. "We just act normal," Ryan finally said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Like we always have." "Right," Nina agreed, nodding too quickly. "Normal. We can do normal." They couldn't do normal. They'd forgotten what normal even looked like. Jake arrived Friday night with pizza and beer, hugging his sister and clapping his best friend on the shoulder. At first, everything seemed fine. They ate pizza, drank beer, caught up on Jake's new job and his dating life. But Jake had always been observant, especially when it came to his little sister. He noticed small things. How Nina and Ryan sat on opposite ends of the couch, when usually they'd be more relaxed. How they didn't look directly at each other when speaking. How the air in the apartment felt charged with something he couldn't quite identify. Saturday morning confirmed his suspicions. Jake woke early and came into the kitchen to find Ryan already making coffee. Nina walked in moments later, still in her sleep clothes, hair messy. She headed straight for the coffee pot, and Ryan automatically moved to get her favorite mug from the cabinet. He poured her coffee, added the exact amount of cream and sugar she liked without asking, and handed it to her. Their fingers touched briefly, both pulled back quickly. Nina mumbled thanks without meeting Ryan's eyes and hurried back to her room. The whole interaction took maybe 30 seconds. But Jake saw everything. The familiarity, the tension, the way they moved around each other like magnets, drawn together, but forcing themselves apart. Jake sat at the kitchen table, watching Ryan with calculating eyes. Ryan tried to act casual, but he could feel Jake's stare burning into him. "How long?" Jake asked quietly. "How long what?" Ryan's voice came out defensive. "How long have you had feelings for my sister?" Ryan nearly dropped his coffee mug. I don't. That's not. We're just roommates. Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Ryan, I've known you since we were 12 years old. You think I can't tell when you're lying? I saw how you looked at her just now, and I've noticed how she's been acting weird on our phone calls lately. Ryan sat down heavily across from Jake, running both hands through his hair. He wanted to deny it, should deny it, but the words wouldn't come. It's not like that, Ryan finally said. Nothing's happened. We haven't. I mean, I wouldn't. But you want to. Jake finished for him. It wasn't a question. Ryan couldn't answer. Couldn't lie to his best friend's face. The silence was answer enough. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Ryan braced himself for anger, for accusations, for their friendship to shatter right there in the kitchen. Instead, Jake surprised him. Does she feel the same way? Ryan's head snapped up. I don't know. Maybe. I think so. We haven't talked about it. Why not? Because she's your sister, Ryan said, his voice rough with frustration. Because you're my best friend. Because living together already complicates everything. Because if this goes wrong, I lose both of you. Jake nodded slowly, seeming to consider this. And if it goes right? Ryan blinked. What? You heard me. You're thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Have you thought about what happens if it goes right? Jake, I can't. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. Look, Jake said, leaning forward. I'm not thrilled about this situation. Nina's my little sister, and you're my best friend. It's weird. But I'm not blind. I've watched you with other girls over the years, Ryan. You treat them fine, but it's never serious. You keep them at a distance. But the way you just made Nina's coffee without thinking, the way you looked at her like she was the only person in the world, I've never seen you like that. Ryan didn't know what to say. His heart was pounding. I'm watching you this weekend, Jake continued, his voice taking on an edge of warning. Both of you. And if I see that Nina's invested in this thing between you, if I see that she's falling for you too, then you and I are going to have a serious talk about what happens next. The rest of Saturday was tense. Jake watched them like a hawk. Every interaction, every glance, every moment they were in the same room, Nina could feel her brother's eyes on her, making her even more self-conscious than she already was. She tried to act casual, but she kept messing up, laughing too loud at Ryan's jokes, getting flustered when Ryan asked her simple questions, finding excuses to leave the room when the attention felt too heavy. That evening, Jake suggested they order Chinese food and watch a game. They settled in the living room. Jake in the armchair, Nina and Ryan on opposite ends of the couch. But as the game went on, and they relaxed slightly, old habits crept back in. Nina shifted closer to the middle of the couch. Ryan did the same. By halftime, they were sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Jake's phone rang. It was one of his coworkers with a question about a Monday morning project. He stepped out onto the balcony to take the call. And suddenly Nina and Ryan were alone. They looked at each other. Really looked at each other. For the first time since Jake arrived. He knows, Nina whispered. I know, Ryan whispered back. What did he say to you this morning? He asked how long I've had feelings for you. Nina's breath caught. What did you tell him? I didn't deny it. Ryan's eyes were intense on hers. I couldn't. Nina's heart was racing now. Ryan, your brother's watching us to see if this is real, Ryan said quietly. To see if you feel it too. Do you want to know if I feel it too? Nina asked, her voice barely audible. Before Ryan could answer, Jake came back inside, pocketing his phone. He looked at both of them, noting their closeness, their flushed faces, the way they were leaning toward each other. He sat back down without a word. But Nina saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or resignation. The rest of the evening passed in this strange, loaded silence. When Jake finally said goodnight and went to the guest room, Nina and Ryan sat on the couch for a few more minutes. Not speaking. Not moving. Finally, Nina stood up. "Good night, Ryan." "Good night, Nina." She made it to her bedroom door before turning back. Ryan was still sitting on the couch, watching her. Their eyes met across the room, and in that look was everything they hadn't said out loud. Then Nina closed her door, leaning against it with her eyes shut, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Jake left Sunday afternoon with a knowing look and a cryptic piece of advice for Ryan at the door. "Don't waste time being scared," he said quietly, so Nina couldn't hear. "But if you hurt her, best friend or not, we're done. You understand me?" Ryan nodded, his throat tight. He understood perfectly. The next 2 weeks were the hardest yet. Jake's visit had changed something, brought everything to the surface in a way they couldn't ignore anymore. But neither Nina nor Ryan knew how to take the next step. They were trapped in this in-between space, both knowing how they felt but terrified to say it out loud. Nina threw herself into work, staying late at school, volunteering for extra committees, anything to avoid being home alone with Ryan and the feelings she couldn't control. Ryan did the same, taking every overtime shift offered, coming home exhausted just so he wouldn't have to lie awake thinking about the woman sleeping one room over. Then Nina's friend from work, a teacher named Bethany, decided to set her up on a blind date. Nina tried to say no, but Bethany was persistent. Finally, Nina agreed, thinking maybe this was what she needed, some distance. A reminder that Ryan wasn't the only man in the world. A chance to prove to herself that these feelings would pass. The date was on a Friday night. Ryan came home from work to find Nina getting ready, wearing a dress he'd never seen before. His stomach dropped. "You look nice," he managed to say. "Special occasion?" "Just dinner with a friend," Nina said, not meeting his eyes. It wasn't technically a lie. She didn't owe Ryan an explanation. They weren't together. They weren't anything. But Ryan knew. He could see it in the way she was dressed, the nervous energy rolling off her. Nina was going on a date. He went to his room, shut the door, and tried not to think about some other guy sitting across from Nina, making her laugh, maybe touching her hand across the table. He failed miserably. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. He tried watching TV, playing games on his phone, anything to distract himself. Nothing worked. Nina's date was a disaster from the start. The guy, a friend of Bethany's cousin, spent the entire appetizer talking about his ex-girlfriend. During the main course, he interrupted Nina every time she tried to speak. By dessert, he'd had too much wine and started getting pushy, suggesting they skip coffee and go back to his place. Nina politely declined. He insisted. She declined more firmly. He grabbed her wrist across the table, his grip tight, his smile turning ugly. "Come on. Don't be like that. You wore that dress for a reason." Nina yanked her hand away, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the restaurant. Her hands were shaking as she stood on the sidewalk, trying to decide whether to call a cab or just walk home. It was only 8 blocks. The night was clear. She started walking, arms wrapped around herself, feeling stupid and upset, and wanting to be anywhere but where she was. She made it home in 15 minutes, unlocked the apartment door quietly, hoping Ryan was in his room so she wouldn't have to explain. But he was in the kitchen, and he turned the moment she walked in. His face changed when he saw her expression. "Nina? What happened? Are you okay?" And just like that, she started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just tears sliding down her face as all the frustration and confusion of the past few weeks crashed over her. Ryan crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. "Did someone hurt you?" "Nina, talk to me. What happened?" "The date was awful," she managed to say through tears. "He was horrible and pushy and grabbed my wrist when I tried to leave, and I shouldn't have gone. I didn't even want to go." Ryan's expression went dark and dangerous. "He grabbed you. Where is he? What restaurant?" "Ryan, no, I'm fine. I left. I just want to forget it." But Ryan wasn't listening. He was looking at her wrist, where faint red marks showed where the guy had gripped her. His jaw clenched, his whole body rigid with barely controlled anger. Give me his name. I'm not letting this go. Ryan, please. Nina put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palm. I don't care about him. I need. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't know how to finish it. But Ryan understood anyway. His anger faded, replaced by something softer and more intense. His hands came up to cup her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Why did you go on a date with him? Ryan asked quietly. Because I'm trying to get over you, Nina whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Because I can't keep feeling like this when nothing's going to happen. Because that morning when I sat on your chest to wake you up, something changed inside me, and I can't change it back. Ryan's breath caught. His hands were still on her face, and she could see every emotion crossing his features. Surprise, relief, want, fear. Nina, he started, but she kept going, unable to stop now that she'd started. I can't think about anything else, she said, her voice breaking. I can't be in the same room with you without wanting to be closer. I notice everything about you now. How you take your coffee. The way you hum when you're cooking. How you smile at your phone when you read something funny. It's driving me crazy, Ryan. And I know this is complicated. I know Jake is your best friend, and I'm his sister, and we live together, and everything could go wrong. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't go on dates with other guys and act like they're what I want when all I want is you. The silence that followed felt endless. Ryan's eyes were locked on hers, his hands still cradling her face. Then, finally, he spoke. That morning, he said, his voice rough and low. When you woke me up like that, I thought I was dreaming. Then I realized you were real, sitting on top of me, looking down at me with that smile, and something just clicked. Like every piece of you and me and us suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. And I've been losing my mind ever since. Nina, watching you, wanting you, hating myself for feeling this way about my best friend's sister, but I can't help it. I can't stand the thought of you with anyone else. I can't pretend I don't feel this. Nina's tears had stopped. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. So what do we do? Ryan's answer was to kiss her. Finally, after weeks of tension and avoidance, and dancing around each other, he closed the distance between them and pressed his lips to hers. Nina's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Ryan's arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. The kiss was desperate and gentle at the same time. Like they were both starving and trying to be careful not to break something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. We tell Jake, Ryan said firmly. We do this right. And we don't hide. Nina nodded, her fingers still gripped in his shirt. Okay. We tell Jake. But first, Ryan said, pulling back just enough to look at her properly. I need you to know, I'm serious about this. About you. This isn't just some roommate thing. Or convenience. Or whatever. You're it for me, Nina. I'm all in. Nina felt something warm and certain settle in her chest, replacing all the fear and confusion. I'm all in too. They kissed again, softer this time, like they had all the time in the world now that they'd finally admitted the truth. Nina woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a second, she wondered if last night had been a dream. Then she remembered Ryan's kiss, his words, the way he'd held her like she was something precious. She smiled into her pillow before getting up. Ryan was in the kitchen, making breakfast. When Nina walked in, he looked up and smiled at her in a way that made her heart skip. No more hiding. No more pretending. Morning, he said, and the single word felt different now. Warmer. Full of meaning. Morning, she replied. And then she was crossing the kitchen and he was pulling her close and they were kissing in the morning light like it was the most natural thing in the world. They spent the weekend in their own bubble, talking about everything they'd been holding back, their feelings, their fears, what this meant for their friendship with Jake, how to navigate living together while dating. It felt surreal and perfect and terrifying all at once. Sunday evening, they called Jake together. Nina sat on the couch with Ryan's arm around her, his phone on speaker between them. When Jake answered, sounding relaxed and happy, Nina almost lost her nerve. "Hey, what's up?" Jake's voice filled the quiet apartment. Ryan and Nina looked at each other. Ryan nodded, encouraging her. Nina took a deep breath. "Jake, we need to tell you something," she started. "You're together," Jake said immediately. "Finally." Nina blinked. "What? How did you—" "Nina, I've known for weeks, since I visited. Honestly, I knew before you two figured it out yourselves." There was amusement in Jake's voice now. "I was waiting for you both to stop being scared and just admit it already." Ryan leaned forward, surprised. "And you're okay with this?" "Okay. Look," Jake said, his tone becoming more serious. "Is it weird? Yeah. You're my best friend, and she's my sister. But I've been watching both of you dance around each other, making yourselves miserable. And I got tired of it. Ryan, I know you. I know you're a good guy. I know you'll treat her right. And Nina, you're a grown woman who can make her own choices. If you want to be with Ryan, I'm not going to stand in your way." Nina felt tears prick her eyes. But these were happy tears. "Really?" "Really," Jake confirmed. "But Ryan, I meant what I said before. You hurt her. And we're done. Best friend or not." "Understood," Ryan said seriously. "I won't hurt her. I promise you that." "Good. Now stop being weird about it and just be happy. Okay? You two deserve it." After they hung up, Nina and Ryan sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Nina started laughing, and Ryan joined in, both of them giddy with relief. The next few months were a learning curve. Dating while living together was different from what either of them expected. Some things were easier because they already knew each other's habits and rhythms. Other things were harder because they had no privacy, no mystery, nowhere to escape when they needed space. But they figured it out together. They established boundaries and date nights and alone time. They learned to communicate better, to fight fair when disagreements came up, to support each other through bad days and celebrate the good ones. Nina's students noticed she was happier, more patient. Ryan's co-workers commented that he smiled more, seemed lighter. Their friends adjusted to seeing them as a couple instead of just roommates. Some were surprised. Others said they'd seen it coming all along. 6 months after that first kiss in the kitchen, Ryan and Nina transformed their apartment into something that felt like a real home instead of just a shared space. They bought furniture together, hung pictures on the walls, created routines and traditions that were uniquely theirs. The morning wake-up ritual became one of their favorites. Nina would still sit on Ryan's chest sometimes to wake him up. But now she'd lean down and kiss him until he opened his eyes. He'd wrap his arms around her and pull her down beside him, and they'd lie there talking for a few minutes before starting their day. One Sunday morning, as they lay tangled together in Ryan's bed, Nina traced patterns on his chest and thought about how strange life was, how one impulsive decision to wake someone up in an unconventional way had changed everything, how what started as a spark of attraction had grown into something deep and real and lasting. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked, running his fingers through her hair. "That morning," Nina said, "when I sat on your chest and woke you up. Best wake-up call of my life," Ryan said with a smile. "I remember looking down at you and feeling something just click into place. Like my body knew something my brain hadn't figured out yet." Ryan pulled her closer. "Your mating instinct, huh? Like the title of those nature documentaries?" Nina laughed and swatted his shoulder playfully. "Don't make fun. You felt it too." "I did," Ryan admitted, his tone becoming serious. "I absolutely did. And I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to act on it, to take that risk." "We both took the risk," Nina corrected. "We both chose this. And I'd choose it again," Ryan said, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Every single time. You're it for me, Nina. You always will be." They kissed, soft and slow. in the morning light filtering through the curtains. Outside, the world was waking up. People starting their Sundays, going about their normal lives, but in that moment, in that room, Nina and Ryan had everything they needed. Later that morning, as they made breakfast together in their kitchen, moving around each other with the ease of long practice, Nina thought about how far they'd come. From strangers to roommates to friends to whatever they were now, something more than all of those things. Partners, home. Ryan caught her staring and raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing, Nina said, smiling. Just thinking about how one moment can change everything. The best things usually start with one moment, Ryan said, pulling her into his arms. One choice, one risk. One person brave enough to sit on someone's chest and wake them up to what they've been missing. Nina laughed against his shoulder, breathing in the smell of coffee and toast and the particular scent that was just Ryan. Home, she thought again. This was home, not the apartment, not the city, but this. Him, them, the life they were building together. One morning at a time. And it had all started because she'd been bold enough to wake him up in the most unconventional way possible. That playful morning had sparked something primal and true, something that had grown into the kind of love that felt like coming home. The kind of love that was worth every risk, every fear, every complication. As they sat down to eat breakfast together, their hands finding each other across the table, Nina knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, and from the way Ryan smiled at her, she knew he felt the same way.